And he's telling me that in his home state of Vermont, they're trying to eliminate grades for students in secondary school. And I asked him, why are they trying to eliminate grades? And I said, is there the obvious example or case, is it sort of racial inequalities? And he said, no, Vermont is 98% white. Like, they're like, it's all white kids at the schools, but they're still trying to eliminate grades. And I asked, well, why do you think that is? And he says, that's just the mindset now.
Hello and welcome to the Americano Show. Today we are not in the Spectator's offices. We are at the ARC conference. ARC stands for Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. It's being held here at the Excel Centre in East London. And I'm delighted that our first guest is someone we've had on before, but someone we're a big fan of at the Americano Show. And that is Rob Henderson, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author, of course, of Troubled, which is your memoir, which is now out in paperback. And I highly recommend all Americano viewers and listeners who haven't read that book to buy it and read it immediately. Rob, lots of things we could talk about. I thought perhaps we should start with this news over the weekend that I think kind of throws up some interesting questions about subjects you're interested in, which is Elon Musk, a woman called Ashley St. Clair posted on X, of all platforms, the platform that Elon Musk owns, that she had had a child. She says with Elon Musk, he has not denied it, it seems to be true. His 13th child, we believe. Mm-hmm. And I thought the reaction of different conservative commentators was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. You had the kind of Christian right saying, this is great, this is wonderful. Then you had other parts of the Christian right saying, hang on a second, what happened to traditional family values? Should we be happy about the fact that Elon Musk is sort of seemingly procreating at will? There's something going on there, isn't there, with kind of social conservatism effectively is not a force in American politics anymore. Nobody cares about, or very few people care about Elon Musk's private life who like Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, first, it's great to be here, Freddie. And yeah, I've been keeping up with the unfolding drama on X, and seen this covered in various outlets between Elon Musk and Ashley St. Clair. And well, I guess my initial reaction was, to the critics of this, arrangement that Elon has, 13 different children with, I believe, 4 different women. Mm. Well, Elon has never called himself a conservative, to my knowledge, and I don't even know if Trump has, but it does feel like there's a shift in the Republican Party where the two most famous members of the party, the president and Elon Musk, are, they are not necessarily known for being sort of those classic traditional social conservatives, devoted fathers and family men and those kinds of things, marriages and divorces and children with different partners and so on. And as I was reading about this and thinking about it, to me it seems like we're just generally, shifting from, I did my PhD in psychology, and I take sometimes an evolutionary psychological lens to these things, and I think to myself, well, historically and cross-culturally, it's often been the case that very high status men do have multiple partners, multiple children with different partners, and sometimes culturally we can contain that impulse in elite men. And I think we've done this somewhat successfully. In the modern era, 13 children is a lot of children. But for the richest man in the world, if you look historically, very powerful men sometimes had children in the hundreds, famously Genghis Khan. Something like 8% of men in Asia can trace their lineage back to this one figure in history. The most prolific male in history was this guy, a Moroccan emperor named Ishmael the Bloodthirsty, who had more than, I think, 800 children in total.
Yeah. He wasn't just bloodthirsty.
Yeah, right. Yeah. with obviously probably well into the hundreds of women. And so I think we're sort of shifting now, maybe more tilting towards that direction where monogamy and marriage and stability and committing to one partner, that has been the historical norm in Western countries for quite some time. But now that the expectations are loosening, the guardrails are starting to come undone, that even Republicans and conservatives are adopting this more permissive view of relationships. in my book Troubled, I talk about this kind of shift over time. So if you go back to 2006 and you ask Americans in general, is it important for children to be raised by two married parents? The majority of Americans said yes, and by far the majority of Republicans said yes. It was something on the order of 80%, maybe closer to 90% of registered Republicans said it's important for children to be raised by two married parents. This was 2006. By 2020, for Republicans, it had dropped to 60%. So a massive decline over the course of those 14 or 15 years. It's still the majority, but much less than it used to be. And so I think even, it used to be more so on the left that there was this skepticism towards marriage and monogamy and committing to one partner for the duration of your lifespan, but now we're seeing it on the right as well.
We had it here in Britain a bit with Boris Johnson, who has a famously complicated love life. And it was always thought to be a potential flaw in him being a prime minister, an electoral flaw for him. But actually, I spoke to people who canvassed with him, and they said because his sort of private life reflected increasingly the private lives of most people. Marriages are breaking down a lot. A lot of people have children with different partners. And therefore he actually related to them to a certain extent. And I'm not sure many people can relate to the Elon Musk situation. But certainly Trump's, marriages, multiple marriages, the religious right was not comfortable with him in 2016, but they're much more comfortable with him now. And there's something going on there, as well as what you point towards, which is this kind of idea that if you're a real alpha male, and particularly this sort of growing manosphere that we have, if you're a real alpha male, the thing to do is just to procreate as much as you can.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like from the conservative perspective, conservatives are often accused of, wanting to go back in history, rewind the clock back to the 1950s or something. But actually, I guess you could argue like certain strands of conservative movements, reactionary movements, they could say, oh no, we don't want to go back to the 50s. We want to go back to not the 1950s, but say like the 1050s, right? or literally 20,000 years ago when we were still hunter-gatherers in these nomadic bands where, the relationship expectations were very different. And, I find it interesting. So obviously people are focusing on Elon Musk. Less, I guess, responsibility seems to be placed on someone like Ashley St. Clair. I'm also curious about the psychology of, women who would, obviously Elon Musk is this famous figure. We know about his history and his relationships and how many children he has. And then also to volunteer to be the next mother of his next child. I'm curious about what's going on there as well. I'm thinking about this line from Steven Pinker in his great book, How the Mind Works. He's a great Harvard psychologist, and in How the Mind Works, he's talking about, status and sex and relationships, and he says that, very, this is kind of simplified, but he says many women would prefer to be the third wife of John F. Kennedy than the first and only wife of Bobo the Clown, right? And the point here being that, like if you have this array of options, you'll take the high status man, even if you have to share his attention and resources and interest, versus, you look at other men who maybe are less impressive or less desirable, and you'd rather just not partner with them. And I think this is also kind of a shift in the culture where we're tilting more, I think, towards this maybe like a softer version of polyamory, of relationship, open, casual relationship structures. I don't think this is great, especially if there are children involved. I think for someone like Elon Musk, if you're, a multi-billionaire and you can hire nannies and help and have all of these structures in place to help raise kids, then maybe it can work for you. But for the majority of people, having multiple baby mamas usually looks like disorder and disaster.
Because you wrote a very interesting essay about sort of how monogamy evolved, why we have an evolutionary impulse towards monogamy. And because a lot of people think it's a sort of something that was just imposed by Christianity, but there are evolutionary reasons why monogamous structures are built up among humans. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, well, I wrote this long review in my Substack of this fantastic book by this anthropologist, Christopher Bain. It's called Hierarchy in the Forest, and he traces kinds of the norms and expectations around social status in hunter-gatherer communities throughout history. So he takes this kind of archaeological lens of, okay, well, what were the similarities throughout sort of evolutionary time of hunter-gatherer communities, which is where the majority of humans existed up until the agricultural revolution about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And he also takes this kind of anthropological lens at existing hunter-gatherer communities in places like South America, parts of Africa, Papua New Guinea. And he basically finds that, drawing on all of this research, that if you look at pre-human history, before modern Homo sapiens, our ancestors had mating systems that were very similar to modern great apes like gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos, where there was a lot of, from the human perspective, kind of promiscuous relationship structures, lots of sex with lots of different partners. Typically, the alpha male in these communities have way more partners than men who are not closer to the top of that dominance hierarchy. And then once Homo sapiens had evolved and we became these nomadic hunter-gatherers, there was this protracted period of monogamy. And this was in part because of warfare and because of hunting, that physically human beings are extremely unimpressive creatures, and the only way that you can support yourself and collect resources and food and build structures to stay safe and so on and so forth is with cooperation. And the only way you can get a large group of males to cooperate is if they don't feel like other males are monopolizing, the women and the resources and having sex with other men's wives and those kinds of things. And so there was this kind of implicit compromise that will develop this norm of marriage, and everyone gets one partner. And this helped to promote and sustain cooperation. But then up till about 10,000 years ago, during the agricultural revolution, we became stationary. We stopped having these nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes. Suddenly people could stockpile lots of resources and amass armies, and emperors could have lots of harems and wives and concubines and those kinds of things. And then you mentioned Christianity. So then about 2,000 years ago, the monogamous norm became prominent once again in Western societies. And that's been basically the expectation up until recent decades. And so it's very interesting. People have this, to me, I think, like kind of a narrow view of history of, Christianity is the reason why we're monogamous. But actually, monogamy predates Christianity by many tens of thousands of years. And so we have these kinds of swings in terms of our relationship structures. There's a kind of a flexibility there, but one of the points I make in my book and in other essays is, yes, humans are sort of behaviorally flexible in terms of their romantic relationships and so on, but the data are clear in terms of if you have children, how do you want them to flourish? Do you want them to be healthy and happy and secure and successful? And the research overwhelmingly suggests that having two married parents, especially during their early years of life, it's critical for their well-being.
Yes. And that perhaps explains why when a story like this Elon Musk story breaks, which, obviously we shouldn't get too interested in, it's just one example of somebody having a child after all. But the reaction to it is very much about the child. Like the sensitivities are about the child. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. People don't think you should condemn Elon Musk. Most people don't seem to think you should condemn Elon Musk for having lots of children. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe a lot of people do, but in my feed anyway, it seems like everybody seems to be defending him. But the sensitivity is about we must make sure this child is protected. And I saw someone accusing the journalists who were going to expose this story before she came out and declared that she had this child, that they were baby doxing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Elon Musk is famously very sensitive about doxing.
Okay. Yeah.
Of any sort. Doxing being revealing, as Americano listeners will know, because we did an episode about it, revealing someone's identity on the internet. But that is quite interesting, I think, because it's similar to the fact in sexual morality now. We are increasingly permissive, but the line has always been sex with children is not okay.
Right.
That is a big moral no-no still. Even though there were moves in the 60s and 70s, slight moves in Britain to try and loosen that, society always rebels against that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that seems to be, with this story, you see children are protected. Children are given moral treatment in a way that other people aren't.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
That sounds right to me. I think we do want children to be sort of safe and healthy. And there's all this discussion now around social media, Jonathan Haidt's work about what screens and devices are doing to kids. But, I guess this is kind of a variation of that, of what's happening on social media, where, the child has the child been born?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, 5 months.
So, there's an infant, and already the infant is famous before, they could speak its first, or he or she could speak their first words.
Yes.
And already, just did this inordinate amount of fame, which is probably not healthy.
And Musk's other child, X, is now one of his other children is being given a lot of prominence, and his mother, Grimes, the musician, has said she's not happy about the amount of exposure he's getting. So there are interesting things going on. A lot of people are praising JD Vance because he's often pictured with his children, that they're normalising having children in public.
Yeah.
Other people might say they're being used as political props and so on.
Yeah, well, I mean, both can be true. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that someone like JD Vance or Elon Musk, I don't think it's like a conscious let me use my children as props. But if you happen to be photographed with them, or you happen to be, it's not always a bad thing in terms of reputation and image and political capital. But yeah, this is it's a strange period that we're seeing right now, sort of going through these relationship upheavals. I think a lot of people are unsatisfied with, dating culture, and so we see someone like Elon Musk. You have, I guess this is sort of a tilt towards. You've probably heard this phrase like barstool conservatism.
Yes.
It's more sort of a libertarian live and let live ethos, where as long as you're happy and you're adults and no one's being harmed, then you can do your thing. And so I think from that perspective, we're sort of prioritizing freedom, and we are trying to protect children's identities, but we're not also, I think broadly considering that, yes, someone like Elon Musk can have lots of kids, and he's ultra wealthy, and in all likelihood those kids are going to be just fine. But for most people, I think prioritizing children's future and health and those kinds of things. Most of us aren't billionaires. Most of us can't hire armies of nannies and caretakers and so on.
Well, I mean, have you noticed that Musk seems to be, in media terms, what Donald Trump was in 2016? He seems to be making all the weather, partly because of his ownership of X, and he is he's probably the biggest voice on X now, or certainly is the biggest voice, I think you could say. He is now the fulcrum of the conversation in many ways.
Yeah, that is interesting. That he's the bad guy. They seem to be going through these waves. Because I remember in 2016, obviously, like Trump was the main character. He was the person that everyone kept speaking about. His name came up so often. I think for a very brief period after the election, it was Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook spreading fake news, disinformation, or whatever. And so he was sort of the poster boy for bad tech elites. Who caused us to have Trump in the White House, and now it's Elon. Now it's Elon's fault that we have Trump, and now Elon is sort of all in on the Trump presidency. And yeah, that is we always need someone to blame, I think, and kind of legacy media and journalists and people, they need. It's very nice to have a name to represent an entire political point of view that you dislike.
Yes.
And it's very convenient, I think, for he's this rich white male billionaire, and that's just really I think it's he's a good target for them.
And are you at all concerned about this, Democrats calling it constitutional crisis and so on, but I think rational people think there may be things to be concerned about with the amount of power now that Elon Musk has, not just with his wealth, but with his political influence, but with his grip on government spending. He is reaching, unprecedented levels of power in American life.
Yeah.
And in fact, world life.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what, how to think about this exactly, because the standard line from the right is that if the Republicans don't do it, the Democrats will, right? And so I think this ideal of impartiality, of don't create or wield weapons you wouldn't want your enemies to use against you later, that kind of thing. Don't violate norms that you would also want your enemies to violate. And So I think there's an argument to be made that like it's useful to respect those norms, and because otherwise it's kind of this race to the bottom of whoever wields power immediately attempts to use it against the other side, and there's a kind of a prisoner's dilemma situation there. But I think kind of on a descriptive level, what we're seeing makes a lot of sense. That there's something about there's a lot of interesting research on kind of the psychology of populism, but one of the interesting findings is that supporters of populism tend not to actually be especially interested in politics. The meme version is they just want to grill, right? They just want to be left alone and barbecue and do their work and raise their families and not be bothered by anything. But they become populists and they want to essentially elect kind of this figurehead, this powerful person to implement the policies that they prefer, and then to just sort of give up all their power to this person, let that person handle it, and let me live my life. Whereas people who are anti-populist, more so on the political left, they are very active in politics. They're really interested in politics. They don't like the idea of having a strong man or a Caesar-like figure, because they themselves want to participate in that political process. They want to be, a commissar, a seat at the table. They want to be one of the members of this kind of elite guild, and come to political decisions by consensus of having a sort of a group of semi-powerful people who collectively decide, rather than having one all-powerful person who makes the decisions and calls the shots. And so I think we're seeing this actually play out now in politics, where people are happy to, I think in 2016, the hope was Trump would do all of these great things for the Republican Party and for the conservatives. And now I think those same people are hoping that Elon is going to get it done with Doge and with his involvement in the government.
So it's a different type of democracy, and it's hard to think of a similar example that we've seen like this before. I mean, critics will say it's like a sort of Latin American democracy. People who are very pro it think it's the great new disruption. But it's not what has come before, and a lot of voters like that because they do associate Washington with sclerotic governments, with inability to get anything done, with waste and so on. And Trump and Musk, between them, are tearing it all up, and people like it.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been the desire for, at least since, I'm old enough to remember, so the first election in which I was old enough to vote was Obama in 2008. And I remember people wanted to vote for him because they were hoping for change, which is like that was his whole campaign slogan. And then they voted for Trump because they were hoping for change, because he was a different type of politician, just as they thought Obama was. And so the American people want some kind of shift in terms of how Washington operates, in terms of politics and policies and laws and norms and regulations and all those things. And I think, I think Trump and Musk, they are responsive to popular sentiment, and they are attempting to deliver on this. So it's, I'm optimistically, I hope it works, but some part of me also worries that, I don't want us to tilt into this kind of like Latin American situation where you have this Caesar-like figure at the top who's, each time we elect a new president, all the laws change and everything transforms, and, you don't know sort of year to year what you're allowed to do and what you're not. So I think, American norms are very strong. I don't think we're going to, veer into that catastrophic outcome, but I can see things potentially spiraling in that direction if we're not careful and if we don't respect those norms. So.
Well, Trump famously joked last year that he was going to be a dictator on day one.
Yeah,
and he was going to drill, and then move on. Yeah. But I would say perhaps the way his administration thinking is that they will be Caesarian, Latin American to a certain extent, for the first 100 days.
Okay.
That's what this breakneck speed is all about. Do absolutely everything they can the first 100 days, on the assumption that by the time they get to the midterms, things will have to slow down and the normal chugging up of government will happen. Am I right? Do you think I'm right in thinking like that? Or?
That's interesting. I hope you're right. And yeah, I mean that sounds right to me. It could also just be not only is Trump and his staff they are moving at a breakneck speed, objectively speaking, but then also the media has an incentive to cover it. And I do wonder how much of what we're seeing is, what's actually happening versus, sort of media amplifying and making it seem sort of perhaps even bigger than it really is. Whereas, as the news cycle moves on and media interest shifts, that not only will Trump slow down, but media coverage will slow down, and things will kind of move back to a more steady state equilibrium.
And I wanted to get through this podcast without saying luxury beliefs, because I know you've got to talk about it later. But I don't think we can really, because when you were talking about that group of people who now find themselves disempowered by this new power structure that Trump and Musk are bringing in, they are the people who hold luxury beliefs. And it's before holding luxury beliefs was a way to get ahead. In this new world, if it is as radical a change as it seems to be at the moment, that might not be true anymore.
Yeah. Well, that might be true in terms of government and in terms of policy, although I think there's kind of an upper bound as to how much they can change things there. But in terms of culture, I mean, elite college graduates, members of the elite who generally tilt more in terms of Democrats, they still wield a lot of power in the institutions and in terms of media and in terms of the press and entertainment and so on. And so I think, the luxury beliefs, they're going to stay with us. The specific examples may shift over time. We saw this with this. For a while, the most fashionable belief was defunding the police a few years ago, and then that kind of faded. And there's going to be new popular movements that arise among elites, not among the general populace. But I don't really see luxury beliefs fading anytime soon. I think people will maybe feel more empowered to call them out in a way, because, for example, X is just, there are fewer restrictions on freedom of speech. You can post what you want, you can share your opinions, and I'm seeing now people openly criticize, say, immigration in a way that they wouldn't have 4 or 5 years ago, not because they didn't want to, but because they knew that if they said something that was potentially offensive, that they would get banned or suspended or reported in some way. Whereas now people are openly saying, oh, maybe the sort of open borders idea isn't so great.
Yeah.
And so
almost on X, it's
criticism.
The inverse, isn't it? Because algorithmically, people are noticing that if you do say spicy things about immigration, you will be boosted, and you may even be retweeted by the man yourself. I don't know. I mean, okay. That's what people say.
I want that Elon Musk retweet. What do I got to do?
Yeah. But I think it is. I mean, it is the conversation on X. We can probably exaggerate how important it is, but it does seem to drive a lot of what the rest of the media talk about. And as a result, a lot of people want to talk about immigration, often in ways that, as you say, would have been considered unacceptable 5-10 years ago. And yet that is now the norm. And people who hold on to their luxury beliefs find that very uncomfortable and alarming.
Yeah. Well, people who hold luxury beliefs, which are ideas and opinions that confer status on the elites while inflicting costs on the less fortunate, the people who wield them tend to hang out and spend time with other people who have, the same background, socioeconomic status, level of education, income, the kinds of white-collar jobs. They're either elites or aspirational elites, and they echo and reflect their opinions off of each other and come to believe, they crystallize this consensus among each other that, well, we all went to great schools and we're all so smart and wonderful, so I guess everyone must agree with us. And then they attempt to roll out those ideas to the public and realize, that's not something that's going to win votes. They attempt to roll out those ideas in, say, a film in Hollywood, and then they don't get much in the way of box office sales. And they're realizing once when you are kind of confined to an elite institution where decisions are determined by your peers, then those beliefs hold a lot of cachet and a lot of status. But once you attempt to expose those ideas to the electoral process or to the free market and realize, actually, people don't like these ideas, I think there's a lot of shock and consternation. And I think this most recent election, we saw that, where there was this argument in 2016 after Trump got elected the first time. It was, we, because I spoke to journalists about this, we in the media didn't do enough to warn the American people about how evil he was, and next time we're going to make sure. And there was this belief that, the American people were bamboozled, they were hoodwinked by this con man, and that's how he got elected. this time he gets elected again. This time he wins the popular vote. This time after almost a decade of relentless drumbeat from the media of how bad he was, and he still gets elected. And I think now there's this surprise that, oh, actually, people are responding to him and they're not responding to us. And now I think there's a period of introspection and kind of interior kind of deliberation and contemplation going on. We'll see how long that lasts.
Luxury beliefs, as I understand from what you've written and spoken to me about before, it's a lot to do with your educational class. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump's administration are talking about making quite radical education reforms. And if the Trump vision for America is a merit-based equality versus a kind of equity, democratic idea of what's going on, education becomes the key factor, because if you can't really have a functional merit-based society unless you have strong education, and America has flaws in its education system that are quite great.
Well, there are flaws already, and the promoters of DEI are attempting to make it even worse by removing merit. And what I find fascinating about DEI, of course, the obvious, when you ask people, well, why do people love DEI so much? The obvious reason is often, there are racial inequalities, in terms of achievement and educational outcomes. But this idea has become so ingrained in a certain kind of faction within the elite that, even in contexts where it doesn't make sense, they promote DEI. So, for example, I talked to this guy in Vermont recently, went to Yale, really smart guy, but he's a skeptic of DEI. And he's telling me that in his home state of Vermont, they're trying to eliminate grades for students in secondary school. And I asked him, why are they trying to eliminate grades? And I said, is there the obvious example or case, is it sort of racial inequalities? And he said, no, Vermont is 98% white. They're it's all white kids at the schools, but they're still trying to eliminate grades. And I asked, well, why do you think that is? And he says, that's just the mindset now. It's not even about inequalities or outcomes or some groups achieving more than others. It's just merit itself needs to be scrapped, the whole idea of it. And that to me is extremely alarming. And so that's one of the bright spots, I think, of the Trump campaign, is not only are they rolling back these excesses, but they're also sort of signaling to people that it's okay to criticize it, it's okay to talk about this and to call it out.
And lastly, we haven't mentioned him so far, but over the weekend, a lot of people in Britain, you'll have noticed, have been talking about JD Vance, because he gave this speech at the Munich Security Conference, and people are saying it was a historic speech. I always think it's a bit hasty when people say it's right up there with Reagan and Churchill. But it was a very good speech, I thought, and a very interesting one. And I know, again, the reason I was reluctant to bring up JD Vance, I know it's quite annoying for you because you both wrote memoirs about growing up in very difficult circumstances. So a lot of people ask you about JD Vance. But he is now becoming this very important figure in the kind of global right, in a way, in the anti-globalist global right.
Yeah, well, I have a great deal of respect for JD and what he's done. And not only for his accomplishments after growing up the way that he did and the successes he's experienced, but one reason why another reason why I respect him is that he himself is, I think, he contains so much of the American experience within him, different sort of political groups, different across the socioeconomic spectrum. So. He grew up the way that he did. He can connect with the working class. They can relate to him. He went to elite schools, and he can relate to people that way. And he understands ordinary people, but he also understands elites. And so he sort of has this foot in both worlds, which I think that gives him kind of a breadth of perspective that a lot of other politicians don't have. And it's just nice to have someone young in the White House. After. We've had these old presidents for a while now, Trump and Biden, and so to just have someone who's youthful, has young kids, a young family, who has a stake in the future in a way that I think a lot of older politicians don't. I think that's refreshing too.
There is quite a lot of youthful vigor in this administration. I mean, because Trump is obviously 78. You've got the youngest ever press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. You've got Pete Hegseth, who's quite a young defense secretary. You've got JD Vance, who I think is the third youngest vice president in history. But only just. I think Nixon was
Yeah.
was
Just a
just
few
slightly-
months. Yeah, it was
just
a
a few
cutoff. Yeah.
But Rob, it's always great to have you on Americana. I do hope we'll get you on again soon and break a leg later on stage at what's your event called?
Social mobility, something along those
Social
lines.
mobility. Yeah, well, important stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Thanks, Brady.
All the best.